Welcome to the latest Mango Report. 6 weeks ago, I asked you a question. I asked you to picture the most advanced artificial intelligence you could imagine. And I told you that whatever image appeared in your head, the face, the eyes, the voice that sounded almost human, I told you that image might be the most consequential and least examined assumption of our generation. We have spent 5 episodes taking that assumption apart. And what we found on the other side of it, the other side of the mirror, is something I did not fully anticipate when I started writing this series. We found that intelligence in nature takes forms so radically different from ours that they challenge the very categories we use to think about what the mind is. We found that the most economically consequential AI systems in the world right now have no face, no name, and no interest in being human. We found that the fears we inherited from 60 years of science fiction were aimed at a monster that does not exist, while the actual challenges were building quietly in the infrastructure of the economy, in the code of systems that make decisions about people's lives. And we found that the question of what AI owes us is, at its deepest level, a question about what we owe to each other. Today is the last episode of the series, and I want to spend it on the only question that remains, now that we have let go of the old stories. What comes next for humanity and AI? Section 1. What the series built. Before I talk about what comes next, I want to take 5 minutes to honor what this series actually built. Not what it said, but what it changed. Episode 1 explored how we built AI in our own image. The definition of intelligence we inherited was built around human conversation, human reasoning, human form. That definition was never neutral. It was a choice, and it has shaped everything that followed. Episode 2 we explored how nature already solved intelligence in the biological world. It is a family of capabilities that takes radically different forms. Distributed, networked and non-centralized, none of which needed to look like a human being to be real, adaptive, and effective. Episode 3 gave us enterprise AI. The most economically consequential AI in the world right now is not the artificial intelligence you chat with. It is the AI embedded in the legal, financial, healthcare, and logistics infrastructure of the global economy, making millions of decisions per day, largely out of public sight. In episode 4 we discussed the warning about the wrong monster. The AI fears that dominate our culture are fears about intention, about a machine that wants to harm us. The real risks are structural. A hiring algorithm does not decide to discriminate. It learns discrimination from the data we gave it and reproduces it at scale. The mirror does not distort. It reflects. Episode 5 gave us this. What does AI owe us? The question of AI obligation is the question of human obligation. What we are willing to demand. What we are willing to govern. What we are willing to build accountability structures around, even when doing so is slow, politically difficult, and commercially inconvenient. 5 episodes. 5 permanent shifts in how to see this technology. And now the 6th. The one that asks, what do you do with all of that? Section 2. What it means to let go of the mirror. The title of this episode is Let Go of the Mirror. And I want to be precise about what I mean by that, because it is not what it might sound like. Letting go of the mirror does not mean abandoning the human perspective. It does not mean treating AI as if it has no relationship to human values, human welfare, or human dignity. It does not mean surrender. It means something more specific and more demanding. It means stopping the practice of evaluating AI primarily by how closely it resembles us. Stopping the habit of asking, can it feel? Can it suffer? Can it pass as a human? And starting to ask the questions that actually determine whether this technology serves the world we want to live in. What does it optimize for, and who decided that? Who benefits when it acts, and who bears the cost when it fails? Who was included in the decision to deploy it, and who was left out? What happens to the people whose labor, whose data, whose communities made it possible, and what do they receive in return? And when it causes harm, as every powerful system eventually does, who is accountable, and what is the remedy? These are not technology questions. They are political questions. Ethical questions. Questions about power and distribution and the kind of society we are actively choosing to build, whether we acknowledge that we are choosing or not. The mirror kept us from asking them. As long as we were focused on whether AI was becoming human, whether it was conscious, whether it could love, whether it would rebel, we were not asking who was writing the objective functions. We were not asking who owned the training data. We were not asking who sat on the ethics boards, and whether those boards had any actual power to say no. Letting go of the mirror means looking at the actual architecture, the actual incentives, the actual distribution of costs and benefits. It means being willing to see the technology as it is, not as we fear it, and not as we hope it, but as it actually functions in the world. That is harder than either the fear or the hope. It asks more of us. But it is the only posture from which we can actually influence what happens next. Section 3. The Manifesto. I want to offer you something to carry out of this series. Not a prediction. Not a policy recommendation. But a set of principles, a way of thinking about AI that I believe is equal to the actual complexity of what we are facing. Intelligence is not ours to define. It is a natural phenomenon that takes forms our categories were not built to contain. The octopus's arm, the crow colony, the mycorrhizal network, the large language model, all of them are doing something real, something consequential, something that deserves to be understood on its own terms. The most dangerous, AI, is not the one that wants to harm us. It is the one that harms us without wanting anything at all. As a side effect of optimizing an objective that was never designed with human welfare at its center. Intention is not required for consequence. Enterprise AI is not coming. It is here. It is already inside the institutions that shape the most consequential decisions of people's lives. The public conversation has not caught up to the deployment reality. Closing that gap is not optional, it is the civic work of this generation. The monster story is the wrong story. Not because AI is safe, but because the real risks do not have faces. They live in feedback loops, in training data, in objective functions, in the gap between deployment speed and governance capacity. You cannot defeat a structural risk with a hero's journey. Obligation is not a philosophical luxury. It is the practical foundation of a functional society. When we deploy systems that make consequential decisions about people's lives, those systems, and the people who built and deployed them, owe accountability, transparency, and the capacity for redress. This is not idealism. It is the minimum standard of a society that takes its own values seriously. The technology is not fate. Every system was designed by someone. Every objective was specified by someone. Every deployment decision was made by someone. All of it was chosen. All of it can be chosen differently. The people with the most power to make different choices are currently making them inside institutions that are not structured to prioritize the outcomes that matter most. That is a governance problem. And governance problems are solvable. That is what I believe. That is what 6 episodes of thinking as carefully as I can about this technology has brought me to. Not certainty. Not a roadmap. But a way of seeing that I think is honest and demanding and equal to what the moment actually requires. Section 4. What you do next. I want to talk to you directly for the last few minutes of this series. Not about AI in the abstract. About you, specifically, and what I think this series asks of you. If you are a worker in an industry being reshaped by AI, and at this point that includes almost every industry, this series asks you to move past both fear and fatalism. The question is not whether AI will affect your work. It will. The question is whether you understand specifically what it is replacing, what it cannot replace, and what it means for the value you bring. That is not a passive question. It requires active learning, honest assessment, and probably some uncomfortable conversations about the parts of your role that can be standardized and the parts that are not. If you are building AI systems, if you write code, design products, manage teams, or make deployment decisions, this series asks you to take seriously the gap between what you can build and what you should build. The fact that something is technically possible and commercially viable does not make it right. You are not just shipping features. You are encoding values. You are making choices that will affect people who had no say in the matter. That is a responsibility. It deserves to be treated like one. If you are a citizen, and you are always a citizen, regardless of your professional role, this series asks you to demand more from the public institutions that are supposed to represent your interests. Not more AI fear. Not more AI hype. More clarity. More accountability. More honest engagement with the actual complexity of what is being deployed, and what it means for the distribution of opportunity and risk in society. And if you are simply someone who is paying attention, which is what the Mango Report asks of its audience, this series asks you to keep paying attention. To not let the conversation be captured by the loudest voices or the simplest narratives. To hold on to the complexity even when it is uncomfortable. Especially when it is uncomfortable. Because the people who shape what AI becomes are not going to be the ones with the most fear or the most hope. They are going to be the ones who see it most clearly. And clarity is something we build together. Through exactly this kind of conversation. Through the willingness to sit with hard questions and resist the comfort of easy answers. That is what this series has been. That is what the Mango Report AI edition is trying to be. We started 6 weeks ago with a single image. The image that appears in your head when you try to picture advanced artificial intelligence. The face. The eyes. The voice that sounds almost human. We asked why that image exists. We traced it back to a test designed in 1950. We traced it forward through 60 years of science fiction, through the boardrooms of the largest companies on Earth, through the philosophy departments that are still working out the language to describe what is actually happening. And we arrived here. At the other side of the mirror. On the other side of the mirror, intelligence is not one thing. It is not located in a human-shaped body. It does not require consciousness to be consequential. It does not require intention to cause harm. It does not require our permission to reshape the world. On the other side of the mirror, the questions that matter are not philosophical luxuries. They are practical necessities. Who benefits? Who bears the cost? Who decides? Who is accountable? What do we owe each other in a world where the most capable intelligence in a given domain may not be located in any human being? On the other side of the mirror, the future is not written. It is being written right now in choices that are being made by people who are, in most cases, trying to do the right thing, and who need the rest of us to be engaged, informed, and demanding enough to help them get it right. That is the world we live in. That is the challenge of this moment. And I genuinely believe, that we are equal to it. Not because the technology will save us. Not because the institutions will figure it out on their own. But because the capacity for clear thinking, honest conversation, and collective action is the one form of intelligence that has never needed any anatomy but ours. Thank you for spending 6 weeks thinking about this with me. Thank you for trusting the complexity. For not asking for simple answers when the questions were hard. This series ends here. The conversation does not. We are the Mango Report, AI edition. Keep paying attention.